Let me start by saying thank you to the California Alumni Association, to Jeff and the entire team for this. Chancellor, under your leadership, Berkeley has not only fought, but is winning. And I have a lot of stories. About Shankar. And because he was so generous to me, I will not repeat them. But let's just say he has a whole bunch of things to be said about him that are pretty exciting as a young man and a very, very clever man. And he, of course, has committed his entire career to the service of something which I love a great deal, which is the institution of Berkeley, the Institution of Electrical Engineering, is obviously, his family is with the university and so forth and so on. Thank you. It's interesting that the most important things in life are sometimes apparent only in hindsight. It's odd, you know, you'd think that you'd be able to pre-plan things. So I had this relatively inchoate idea to go to California because I thought the weather would be nice, and which it is. And the Berkeley faculty called me, and I said, oh, sounds pretty good to me. And I show up, and I went to International House, which was a lot of fun, and is a great institution, and there I met my wife, Wendy. So, pretty important decision to come to Berkeley and in iHouse. At 21, you don't really understand very much. You think you do, of course, and I thought I knew everything. But if you make the right decision, or if the right people pick you, or if you're just lucky, what happens is you end up in a place where you learn something fundamental. And I assumed that when I went to Berkeley, I was going to learn something about computers and computer science and so forth. But I learned all of that, of course, but I learned something much more fundamental. I learned something about tolerance and diversity and respect, which all of us going through the system, we might not have known that. And people aren't born knowing this stuff. You learn it, and you learn it from an institution that has as its core values. I'm very proud to represent the university and say that I care about those values as much today as I did when I was 21, when I learned them at Berkeley. It's interesting that as a graduate student, you're sort of clueless because you're sort of busy. In our case, we worked at night because the computers got faster at night, and nobody here can relate to that except the old people. But before personal computers and Macintoshes and Unix and all that, there was time sharing, and time sharing was shared. So the only way you could really use these things was between 10 and 6 in the morning. And I can tell you that the food on North Side at 4 in the morning has not improved. It's still bad. Go visit. But somehow we managed to get through the food at 4 in the morning and ultimately produce some extraordinary achievements. I and my colleagues and so forth. I was part of a team that was led by a fellow named Bill Joy that ultimately created what is generally known as Berkeley Unix, which is the progenitor of much of the technology that you use today. Of course, the underlying, the leverage over those decades is now seen pretty much everywhere. But we essentially built the architecture of what you know today as the internet at Berkeley. When you think about Berkeley, the other thing to understand is that when you show up, you don't realize that you should start by thanking the generations of people before you that built the institution with these values in the first place. You just assume it's always been there. But in fact, and Chancellor, you can appreciate this, that the previous chancellors fought hard to build a world-class liberal arts institution, one which was committed to access to everybody and not just to the elite and not just to the privileged, and one which is based on a meritocracy of opportunity independent of race, creed, bias, and so forth and so on, the values which are obvious today. So let's salute these people. They built the university before us. So in my usual clueless phase, I show up, and now I find that I've had the benefit of tremendous engineering leadership and minds that went through Berkeley. I'm thinking of Gordon Moore or Doug Engelbart, our predecessors in our industry. In my case, my longtime collaboration with my close friend Bill Joy. Professors and other people associated with the university today, Randy Katz, literally my Carroll mate who invented much of storage hierarchy that we deal with today. David Patterson, still at the university, who invented much of computer architectures that you use today. Dick Karp, who invented most of the math behind computer science, it seems. Eric Brewer, right, who's in the video and has been one of the greatest sort of microarchitecture and storage architecture, computing architecture people that I've ever worked with. What's interesting is that you benefit from these people and you don't realize how unique this benefit is. And the fact that the university can build that not just for me, but for each of you in your own fields is what is remarkable. It is not only a replicable model, but it's a scalable model. So my story, which is very specific and very, very narrow around the kinds of things that I learned from and so forth in the world that we ultimately led to the successes in Silicon Valley, was replicated in math and in physics and in liberal arts and in architecture and so forth. And that is the genius of a public university like Berkeley. The other thing that happens with people like me who go through this is you come to understand that there's more than just science and engineering. You start off with sort of a narrow model, and you begin to understand that there is a greater purpose to what you do. And I think part of my sense of commitment to the world and so forth came out of seeing what happened when you put everybody together in a university like Berkeley. You get a sense that there's something more important than the specific problem set or the specific research, that you do it in purpose or in sum of something to make the world a better place. And the fact that I and others here in the room were given an opportunity to then graduate and actually do this is one of the greatest things in one's career, that you could actually serve the world. So when I think about it, I think about what will Berkeley do next, right? This generation, all of you who've worked so hard to make the university what it is, what in the next 10 years or 20 years or 30 years will happen? What will the leadership of Berkeley look like? And I think we have partially an answer. We know that the world is modernizing, and we know the world is getting smaller. And we know that through the technology, starting with the physicists and the semiconductors and all the other people represented in this room who worked so hard to make this possible, we know that the consequence of our research, the consequence of what we did, is that another 5 billion people will join the global conversation. That's billion with a B. So when you think about the opportunity for Berkeley, don't define it as a state university in California. Don't define it as one of the top, probably the top research university in US, at least by the rankings that I've seen recently. Think of it as a global institution that has a responsibility to take the principles of diversity, tolerance, entrepreneurship, innovation, and most importantly, free speech. Most importantly, free speech, and take that to the rest of the world that has never seen it. They've never had the opportunity. Think of that as your mission. And more importantly, the students that you educate, the people that you fund. Many of you are donors to the university. It's a much, much bigger target. It's a much bigger impact than you could possibly imagine when you think of the scale. So from my perspective, the story of Berkeley is about entrepreneurship. It's about innovation. It's about free speech. It's about having fun. It's about, in my case, being lucky. When you think about the internet and you think about all the things, think about Berkeley. A lot of this was invented there. When you see the world moving to free speech, think Berkeley. Interesting. When you start thinking about all the tools and technologies flying around and so forth, all of the engineering things, so forth, think Berkeley. When you think about much of the culture that we care about, that we celebrate, think Berkeley. Not only do I think Berkeley, but I also thank Berkeley. And I will tell you that luck plays a role. I'm very lucky to be here, and I'm very humbled by the honor. As I said, I think this is probably the most significant honor I'll ever get because it ties my whole life together. But when I think about it, I think of it as an expression of a system that produces this over and over and over again. I cannot wait to see what the graduates today will do in a decade or in another decade or in another decade. The message of optimism is so profound. So what I would like, I have one request. I want you all to fight for learning It is the answer to the problems that are true in the world today. Every one of them is ultimately solved by a learning answer, an understanding answer, a tolerance answer. The university is committed to this. It's 100% goal alignment. Let's fight for that. Let's fight for education, because the thing that separates the past and the future, and whether it's going to be good or bad, will be the quality of the education that all of these 7 billion people get. And trust me, it matters. And it matters more than people say on television or in the political system or in governance. It matters enormously. The people who founded the modern system at Berkeley, the modern public sector education system in California, understood this in the 50s and 60s. And California today is literally this extraordinary engine because of that decisions that we celebrate. I want you to fight for higher education, and in particular for research institutions. But most importantly, I want you to fight for Berkeley. Thank you so very, very much. Take care. Thank you.